Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Green Room for DisrupTV. And more importantly, to this latest episode. We got amazing guests. And as you know, I'm Ray, your host. And Vala Ashar is out this week, but he'll be back for the next episode. And of course, we got our amazing producer, Elle, who you all know. And of course, we're going to introduce our guests in reverse order of appearance. So first off, Jeff, where are you coming in from? What are we talking about today?
Great to be here. I am coming in from New York, and we are talking about how to tap into the hidden wisdom of people all around you. Find out things that you most need to know that people are least likely to tell you.
What do they have to do?
They have to ask, but ask in the right ways, with curiosity, with listening, and we'll talk more about that.
We'll definitely do that. Frederik, where are you coming in from? What are we talking about?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm here in a little geodesic dome in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California. And what I have for you today is your future and how you can invent a better one. So I really want you to know that the future is not something that happens to us. It's something that we can actively shape. And I want to give you today the way to do that.
Well, what's next is coming now. So we'll definitely talk about that. Excellent. Anand, where are you coming from? What are we talking about?
Oh, just outside of Washington, D.C. And thank you, Ray, and thank you, Elle, for having all of us. We're looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. I'm going to be talking about that beautiful intersection of digital health and artificial intelligence and what we can do with AI to actually transform, if you would, the care continuum. And as a type 2 diabetes patient myself, who got into this digital health space because of my interest in helping what we could do with technology and bringing it to the fingertips of users who suffer from these chronic conditions, AI can do so much, and super excited to share some of those insights.
Oh, yeah. The CGMs have come a long way, plus the AI on top of it, and the data sets are amazing. So, yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that. So, well, welcome, everyone. So, hey, coming back to you, Elle. We'll do it. Go in for the count.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to DisrupTV. And as you know, this is our latest episode. More importantly, I'm Ray Wang. I'm actually your host for the day. And of course, Vala Ashar will be back for the next episode. In this episode, we're going to talk to some amazing guests. And more importantly, in episode 373, we're going to kick off and talk to, as we normally do, startup advisors, enterprise news, influencers, and of course, excellent authors and A-list guests. And as you know, every show 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern every Friday, where we broadcast. And more importantly, we have great guests. To kick it off today, we've got Anand Iyer, the Chief AI Officer at Welldoc. Anand is a respected global digital health innovator and leader, most known for his insights and, of course, experience with technology, strategy, and regulatory policy. Anand's been instrumental in Welldoc's success in the development of Blue Star, the first FDA-cleared digital therapeutic for adults with type 2 diabetes. But more importantly, since 2008, he's held core leadership positions that include president and chief operating officer and chief strategy officer. And more importantly, he's been named a healthcare innovator of the year for the state of Maryland, especially in the field of mobile health. Anand, as you know, is very, very accomplished. But more importantly, we're going to spend some time talking about latest innovations in AI, the intersections of where that is and the continuum of care. And more importantly, understand how Welldoc is actually using AI to really transform their business. Welcome to the show, Anand.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ray.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. One of the best topics that we have here has always been healthcare and tech, and really that intersection. And more importantly, what you normally do is actually bring different fields together and that intersection of fields. So where is healthcare? What is healthcare trying to do by utilizing AI?
It's a great question. I think the healthcare, you listen to it, and all we hear is, rising costs, worsening outcomes, increasing incidences of pandemics, chronic conditions, et cetera. At the same time, the denominator of all of this is becoming untenable. These things are becoming very expensive at the individual level, at the corporate level, and certainly at the macroeconomic level. It's such a large portion of entire countries' GDPs go to their healthcare spend. And so I think at the very top level, Ray, they're looking for ways to do two very simple things. How can I innovate in the numerator? Means how can I transform the care continuum to start to focus the efforts instead of on acute care, to move back into the continuum that says, can I start to focus on management and even prevention? So can I use data insights? Can I use modeling? Can I use the vast data that we can acquire from emerging sensors like continuous glucose monitors to build models to actually help me focus the attention on prevention, right? So they're looking for shifting that emphasis, which then, of course, allows you to improve the numerator outcomes, healthcare outcomes, think of glucose outcomes, blood pressure outcomes, lipid outcomes, things like that. The second time, they're looking to do this more efficiently. We hear about resource constraints. We hear about inefficiencies in the healthcare system. My friend, Ann Johnson, who's the CEO of the American Telemedicine Association, says during COVID, when doctors saw patients via telemedicine consult, for every 1 hour they spent seeing the patient, they spent 2 hours writing notes into their EMR. Well, that's untenable. So I think they're looking for innovation in the numerator, Ray. They're looking for efficiencies and cost savings and do differently in the denominator. I think AI has the ability to actually have your cake and eat it too and do both.
That's really important, right? A lot of organizations are trying to figure out where they fit in that healthcare spectrum. And more importantly, how's that going to actually help them get to those efficiencies? And there's a lot of manual entry for physicians. And you're so totally right about that. When you break that down, right, there's all the hype around AI. Where are people taking advantage of it? Is it in the ability to do speech to text? Is it the ability to do ontologies? I mean, all those things, are they playing a role? Is it the recommendations or the automation? Like, where do you see that growing up?
I think it's a two-part response, Ray, that first starts with, let's define what it is we actually mean by AI. There's actually a lot of noise and confusion about what that is. And then perhaps once we do that, we can actually talk about the use cases, if that makes sense. So I think principally, there's so much excitement, which is a very positive thing, but with excitement, of course, comes sometimes misunderstanding. And AI is, one of the things that is on everybody's tip of their tongue. They're talking about it in every corner of every industry. And they oftentimes synonymize AI with what's known as generative AI. It's this new, cool, sexy kid on the block. And at the same time, if you step back, being a Carnegie Mellon grad, it's something near and dear to my heart, that AI is actually a much bigger thing. And it starts with what we call the rules-based engine, right? So how do you teach a machine to do what a human would otherwise do? And that can be accomplished with a simple set of rules, complex set of rules. So you can imagine there's even the gradation of the complexity of a rules engine. But the pluses of those types of AI approaches, of course, is that they're traceable. Yes. For a given rule, the output is known. And by the way, the regulatory agencies love that. Why? They can trace a patient safety all the way back to a set of rules and say, okay, if you can show me these rules, and I can conclude that your product is safe. As you go to the next level of AI, where it's not fixed anymore, it's adapting, the realm of what we call machine learning. And in machine learning, you're feeding data to an algorithm, but the algorithm is adapting, it's changing, it's starting to realize nuances, and therefore it's customizing itself and optimizing itself for different conditions, different situations, in our case, for different patients. The next level from that is when you apply what we call deep learning. Well, these work very well on large data sets, complex neural network models. And then you have this new kid on the block called generative AI, where it's actually, you give it all this stuff and it comes up with brand new content. So I think the reality is all four of these forms of AI, not just the last one, generative, that has everybody excited, all four of these work their way into healthcare. So how do they actually unlock value? And I think the way we think at Welldoc, and something that the industry is embracing, our views on how to organize the integration of AI, judicious integration of AI into healthcare, is almost a 2x2, where one vector is risk. Are you talking about a low risk application of AI or a high risk? And I'll talk about it, what it means in a second, really quickly. And then the second vector is, what's the intent? Going back to what I said originally, is the intent of the AI to do something you otherwise do today, but better, faster, cheaper, i.e. more efficiently, or is the intent to do something you couldn't do before? So think about a patient who has a high glucose reading. They have recurrent high glucose readings. They go to their doctor, they talk to their educator. I can automate a rules-based engine to tell them on an app what to do when your glucose is X, Y, or Z. So now you're introducing what you call low-risk categories. You're introducing how a patient can actually use that AI to help them manage on a day-to-day basis. But if you're now going to use that to, say, titrate a medication, maybe their insulin dosing, that's a high-risk situation. So you have to make sure you have the controls, the safety, the this and the that. It's traceable to evidence-based guidelines. Those are things that improve efficiencies. You're allowing for patients to do things when they're not seeing their healthcare providers, which is 99% of the equation. They have to manage their health. But then as you start to think about the top, now I'm wearing a Apple Watch, or I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor from an Abbott or a Dexcom, and I'm getting this steady stream of biometric data. And maybe I can use that data to predict, am I going to hit my objectives? Can I use that data in conjunction with my food data to say, hey, I set an objective to hit my weight loss of, in 3 months. Am I going to do it or not? Or I'll tell you the fun one, which is, we all know how GPT-4 works, ChatGPT, things like that, where it creates a sentence, if you would, sentences, and creates paragraphs. I mean, every kid, that's what they're using to write their college essays, is what I hear. My kids are beyond that, but that's what I hear from the kids behind us. But imagine that same technology now, the same approach, being used to generate a sentence of numbers, a CGM prediction. So now, after just wearing a sensor for maybe a day, 2 days, maybe the AI takes over. Why is that important? A, it does it very accurately. B, you're reducing the cost of wearing that sensor all the time. So all of a sudden, there's a value proposition. So I think these are the types of use cases, if that makes sense. We have to consider risk, and we have to consider what the application is, if that makes sense.
Actually, let's take some acronym soup. GPT-4 meets GLP-1. Where does that go?
So
I know you would like that.
we joke about it all the time, that you go to a conference and there's only two things people are talking about. One is GLP-1 and one is CGM, right? And AI. That's what they're talking about, right? That's healthcare.
In your world, A1C as well. So
well, so in all seriousness, though, when you think about GLP-1s, I mean, we're almost getting to the point where you're asking, what doesn't this drug do? And it creates, glucose benefits. It's creating heart benefits. They're now saying that there's Alzheimer's benefits. I mean, so these are wonder drugs, right? You start to think about these molecules and what they can do, but they're very, very, very expensive. They're very expensive. And now you have the new classes of GLP-1s that are focused just on weight management. So they started out with type 2 diabetes, but you have the Ozempic has Wegovy, of course, the tirzepatide molecule. You had Mounjaro, which is for diabetes, but now you have Zepbound for weight. And you start to think about the weight epidemic we have in this country, right? To think of obesity, where 40% of Americans, and that number is climbing, that are obese. And so now you have this dilemma. In theory, you'd like to give this to as many people as you could, because it's going to help improve their quality of life. It's going to get their clinical markers into range. Their productivity is going to go up, blah, 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 but it's expensive. So now, enter stage left AI. Well, what if I could maybe have somebody on that and then use data to then drive models to understand, well, what are the attributes of a person who really needs it versus what are the attributes of a person who could actually get away with maybe some coaching, weight tracking, other pathways that may be less expensive. And so I think what AI allows is it takes away the concept of one size fits all, and it makes things flexible. You have the ability to have data-driven strategies. Imagine that. The data is actually going to illuminate who's right for path one, who's right for path two, may or may not include a GLP-1. I think that's where we're going to get to, where you're not just handing this stuff out like candy, you're judiciously giving it to the people who can benefit from it the most. And perhaps there are other pathways that are more cost effective.
Right. And we can actually do a comparison between semaglutide and tirzepatide to see which actually is working for whom based on their biomarkers, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's actually getting really interesting, right? I mean, it all comes back to data, all comes back to data science. So where do you see the future of AI in healthcare? Is it going to be more data, more science? What happened to the art of medicine? Where does that go?
Well, so it's I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, but I'm dead serious about it. People ask us all the time, will AI replace a doctor? Yeah, just ask us that. Hey, do you think AI is going to replace a doctor? And your answer is hell no. Absolutely not. But,
Okay.
a doctor who uses AI may very well replace one who doesn't. Okay? So, the analogy that comes to my mind, Ray, I use this a lot, which is, when you look up in the nighttime sky and you see a point of light,
Yep.
and, you look up and say, oh, it's a star, or maybe the more astute will say it's a planet, whatever it is. But then you look at that same point of light through the Webb telescope and you're like, oh my God, I see 7 galaxies. The Webb telescope is to the astronomer what AI in digital health is to the doctor. It lets the doctor see things that can't be seen by the naked eye alone. It lets them look deeper than what they can see in a 5 or 10 minute off. Oh, that's what's going on with you. Or let's address that. Let's work on that. I think the future is one towards personalization. Today, there's no blame here, Ray. Especially primary care, they're front line for everything.
Oh my God, and
I
they're
have
getting hammered. They're getting
yeah,
hammered.
I have this rash, or I have, I don't know if I have COVID. By the way, how's your blood sugar doing? I don't know. I don't know what happened yesterday, right? So they're being bombarded, and they just don't have the time. And in many cases, all these evidence-based guidelines are changing so rapidly, they can't keep up with it. So at the same time, you want their guidance. You don't want to, I don't want to use an AI machine to be my doctor. But boy, if I could have something that helps my doctor understand what's actually happening with me, not some cohort, but me personally, you're using that data to drive personalization. And I think that in many ways is the holy grail. I call it the Google Maps for a patient. I mean, you set a trajectory from Washington, D.C. to New York, and there's a traffic jam here and there's a traffic jam there, and it routes you around it because you want to get there. Why can't we have similar data-driven algorithms for managing healthcare? I want to improve my hemoglobin A1C by this much. I want to improve my blood pressure control. Why can't I have those turn-by-turn instructions about how I eat, how much medicine I should take, how I exercise, how I sleep, my psychosocial status, all the vectors that we manage in our Welldoc platform? AI becomes a powerful transformation agent for that going forward.
Oh my God, we're gonna have to talk about this more. Definitely at the AI Summit and definitely at our conference in Half Moon Bay. But we're definitely seeing these intersections come together. I actually want to ask you one other question. It's actually interesting about that future of medicine. Because if you think about it, the frontline physicians, we're going to have a massive shortage of physicians coming forward, right? A lot of people are leaving primary care to do VIP medicine, concierge medicine, right? And so we've gone from 4 patients an hour to 1 patient an hour. That takes capacity out by that percentage. And we also have some massive hits in terms of the aging population of physicians. Are we going to have our AI docs in the future, along with our physical docs, along with other technologies that are going to be helping us? Will we have our own? Do you think we should have our own personal EMR that we walk with, and kind of that's our own well-being?
It's the proverbial question: who has the data and who has access to the data, and more importantly, who owns the data? Right? At the end of the day, if I'm generating all this data, the patient, I own the data. If that data can be used to provide me precise guidance with my clinical oversight, that kind of makes sense. If it's going to help me and it's going to help others, perhaps because I'm contributing to a larger knowledge model that may be useful for others who may be like me, right? So maybe there's an altruistic aspect of this that says, hey, maybe by using this data and opening this data, which brings out the point of collaboration. I think the future, Ray, is going to be one where there's going to be more collaboration with sharing, anonymized, of course, and protected. We have to respect HIPAA, we have to respect GDPR, all these things where we don't want to break any of those rules. But even within those constraints, there's so much we can do by merging data sets where we start to understand claims, labs, what we call patient-generated health data, my daily glucose, my food, my exercise, my this. Yep. Imagine the wealth of that. And so think about this one thing. We're 2024 today. When did the iPhone come out, Ray?
I can't remember. I want to say 2004. 4, 5.
7. So
There you go.
2007 iPhone comes out. So that means we're 17 years into the iPhone generation. Okay. That means these kids are going to college. We call it the iPhone generation. That means
Yeah.
they're 4 years away from going to medical school. And I always joke, do you think they're going to want to graduate with a stethoscope that goes to thump, to thump, to thump, when they can get a perfect ECG signal using digital technologies today? So I think there's an inevitability. That the future of healthcare is going to include, we won't call it digital health in 5 years, Ray. We'll just call it health. And it better have a digital component. And if it doesn't have a digital component, one may argue it's not relevant anymore. It's not valuable, right? So I think we're headed to the point where it will become an important arrow in the quiver of healthcare.
We've got augmented healthcare coming. It's coming soon. So we're here with Anand Iyer, Chief AI Officer at Welldoc, one of the top leaders in AI. And of course, we hope to see you at some of our events soon. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Wow. This topic of AI and health, we're definitely going to be talking about more at the Constellation Connected Enterprise event, October 28th to 31st. And of course, a little bit of it at our AI Forum out in New York on September 23rd. And so definitely a hot topic. But speaking about other hot topics, we've got our next guest, and we're going to share with you a little bit of his bio, but more importantly, talking about what's next and great in this market. So we're here with Frederik Pferdt. He's Google's first and foremost Chief Innovation Evangelist. And we're going to talk about his upcoming book, What's Next Is Now, How to Live Future Ready. Not only was he Google's first Chief Innovation Evangelist, he's been one of the most important futurists out there. He founded the Google Innovation Lab, where he trained thousands of Googlers to develop and experiment with cutting-edge ideas. He taught groundbreaking classes on innovation at the D-School and Stanford University. And of course, he's been advising organizations from the UN to NASA and the MBA. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I want to know. He's been featured on Fast Company, Harvard Business Review Press, Der Spiegel, BBC News, and of course, other media outlets. And of course, he lives in this biodome, I think, on top of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So welcome to the show, Frederik.
Thank you so much for having me, Ray.
I'm so excited to have you. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. And more importantly, we're going to get some sneak insights into your upcoming book. Let's talk about future, right? I grew up on pesto models, classic training, politics, economics, society, technology, environment, maybe legislative, right? The classic pesto approach. But that doesn't really capture the sentiment of how people feel about the future. How do people feel about the future? Where are we right now?
Yeah, it's such a hot topic, I think, forever, right? Because the future is something everybody wants to figure out and know more about. And I think that's great and that's exciting. And that also led me to actually write a book about your future, which maybe has a very different spin on it, where we usually think about the future as something that is external, that is the outer world, right? And we heard Anand speaking about it. We heard you talking about how you experience the future in terms of technology, in terms of the economy, in terms of society, in terms of all of those trends. But to be honest, if we would step back for a moment and just think about not the question, what will the future bring? Because that's probably top of mind for most people. But think about the question, what future do I want to create? I think we are changing our relationship with our future. And so, Ray, if I have you complete that sentence, the future is, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Infinite.
Infinite. Fantastic. Another one, the future I create is?
Exciting.
Wonderful. So you just changed the word, right? You've moved from infinite to exciting. And so that's for me fascinating, because the first sentence you completed, the future is something that, it's about predictions, it's about the objective, the external world out there, right? As soon as we put ourselves into the picture of the future, where we say the future I create and I shape is, we change the word that we're using to describe that future. And it moves from, in your case, infinite to exciting. And most people use a positive word for it, right? Which I really like. So the future for most people, what they want to see happening is something positive. And it's for me fascinating because you described me as a futurist, which I'm not. I'm a future optimist, where futurists really predict trends and anticipate, what might happen, right? And I think futurists do an amazing job painting the pictures of an utopian or a dystopian future that might be happening. For me, it's more important as a future optimist that I focus on the positive potential we all have to shape the future. And this perspective really comes from my experience at Google also, right? Where I saw how optimism can really fuel innovation. And for me, it's important to give people control over their future, because what we mostly talk about when we think about the future is, again, like the outer world that we don't have any control over. So let's talk about the inner world that we can actually fully control.
Frederik, that was the most interesting thing about the book when I was looking at the excerpts and the material that we had here. You gave people the power of agency to take their future in their own hands. And once you did that, it became a less scary place, if anything. And I wasn't expecting you to ask me those questions, and those are gut reactions. And I think that's actually pretty interesting, because if we were to do this exercise in front of thousands of people in a keynote, I think they would discover the same thing, right? This mind state. Let's talk about some of the elements of that mind state, because I think it's important for people to understand how you've broken this down. And I think that will help them understand why it's inspirational and actionable once you're in that mind state and make that frame shift.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I totally understand that many people feel a mix of uncertainty and anxiety about the future when they think about this far distant future that, most people paint a picture about, especially given the rapid changes that we're all witnessing globally. So it's really natural to feel this way. But I believe these feelings stem from focusing too much on what we cannot control. Instead, if we shift, as you just mentioned, our focus to what we can create and what we can start shape and control, we see the future not as something to fear, but as an opportunity to shape the world that we want to live in. And I'm glad to hear that it did that shift for you. So you have now a different relationship with your future. And hopefully I can do that with many more people around the world. Because the question is, what can we actually control? And we can not control, like, the future of AI in healthcare that Anand just talked about, right? I think it's an exciting future, but it's mostly out of people's control. But you have fully control over how you want to be in the future. That's what you decide. So maybe you want to be happier. Maybe you want to be healthier. Maybe you want to show up more curious. Maybe you want to be more kind, more loving, want to have a better relationship with your partner. All of those things are in your control. So for me, what I want to offer people is what I call a future-ready mind state. And the dimensions I talk about in my book and how you can create a better future for yourself is if you can control to be more optimistic, more open, more curious, more experimental, and more empathetic. Those 5 dimensions really are in your control. And if you dial those up, and I've seen those with thousands of people that I've been able to work with and also feature in the book, when they dial those dimensions up, they see a better future for them happening. And I think that's very compelling.
Let's talk about that first dimension, optimism. So that's kind of in short supply these days. I don't know. Should we be feeling optimistic about the future given all the bombarding problems we face?
You just beautifully demonstrated that, right? When you completed the second sentence, the future I create is, and you said exciting, right? That's an optimistic expression of how you view the future. And for me, we mostly categorize people in 2 buckets, right? We say, this is a pessimistic person who only paints a dystopian vision of the future. And this is an optimistic person who says, like, the future is going to be bright. For me, I want to go beyond that and say, like, we need radical optimism. As you said, optimism is in short supply, but if we can shift our perspective to say there is an opportunity where we not just say the glass is half full, but we say there is a potential to fill the glass even further, that's the radical optimistic view about the future. And for me, watching so many people having that optimistic view and radically optimistic view about the future really helped them to make progress and move forward towards building the visions they had about the future.
That's a great point, right? And, each one of these areas are really important, right? Having that level of optimism. Is there such a thing as you go through your dimensions? Is there such a thing as a different type of openness, unreserved openness? Can you be unreserved in your openness?
You absolutely can. So being open to new ideas and perspectives, I think, is crucial. As we mostly not open every door that we encounter, right? By saying like, we're too scared, we don't want to take a risk, we don't want to, really know what's behind the door. Unreserved open is the opposite, where you literally go beyond beyond opening the doors, you actually enter the doors and see like what you can discover. And that unreserved openness is so powerful because it really leads you to new opportunities, right? If you're open to listen to a new idea, for example, from your colleagues, that gives you a new perspective. It allows you to see something new, and it allows you to see a new opportunity. And just ask yourself, like, how often are you truly open to a new idea, a new approach of doing things, a new way of solving a problem? And what I found is mostly people say like, nah, I'm kind of open. And then I push them towards like, just check on the next situation you encounter where you can actually be open and choose open as a response, because that's going to lead to the next opportunity for you.
Yeah, this is actually really important, right? Having that openness actually changes your perspective again as your frame shift. What about experimentalism? I mean, and experimentation, right? People are scared to take chances and fail. How does that change your future ready mind state?
Yes. For me, perpetual experimentation is really about embracing continuous learning, because from every experiment you do, you learn something new. And that is the key to the future, because the path to the future is really paved with experiments, right? And we all know that. You have to try something out to see what works, what doesn't work, to go beyond that, to really make progress and move forward. And so experimenting is something that is part of our daily lives. But how often do we rather not experiment and try something new, right?
Ask yourself. We're afraid, right? We're afraid of trying something. We're in our habits. We follow everything. I mean, I might be the exception. Like, I don't have the same schedule any day of the week, right? This is probably the only regular item I have is DisrupTV. And after that, there's no regular scheduled meetings. So.
I love that. And absolutely, like, we have that fear of failure. That's just built into us, right? From the early days, right, of humanity. Totally fine, right? If you walked out of your cave, there are dangers out there, right? If you eat a poisonous plant and experiment, right, you could probably die. If you are facing like a predator, right, who might kind of like hurt you in some form or some way, absolutely, you don't want to experiment fighting with that predator. But I think in our days today, right, we can do so more experiments and move beyond that, what we have ingrained in our minds that really protects us to not do experiments and playing it safe, where we can learn something new, right? By experimenting, for example, with AI, right? That's a perfect example where most people in the first place say like, I don't have to try this. I don't want to go this route. That's too far out, whatever it is. It could potentially put me in dangers. And I tell people like, what is the worst thing that can happen if you give it a try, right? You might learn something new. Beautiful. The worst thing that mostly happens if you don't experiment is that you go back to square one. You stay with the status quo. And I think for me, that's not about progress. That's not about the future. So we have to get into that experimental mind state.
You start the book out talking about how you came down a massive fire. We were all in that lightning fire that was going on, and what happened to your home. Tell people what happened there, right? How did that change your perspective? So.
Yes. So I start off with that story that really helped me to understand what is in my control and what is not in my control, right? And so,
I mean, a massive forest fire in the Santa Cruz Mountains is not in anyone's control.
Absolutely. And that burned just a mile from here, right? So you could smell the fire, you could feel the heat, you
Was your
could
home
see the
okay?
fire. So you find yourself in that situation where the fire is literally coming towards your home. And we are a family of 5. And so what happens is you think about, like, what can you control, right? You can't put out the fire. It's impossible. You can blame everyone around you, right, who might be responsible for not being put out the fire and so forth. That's your choice. But I didn't choose that route because that's also something you can't control and doesn't go the fire away, interestingly, right? So what I did is, when the police officer knocked on our door and said, like, you have 10 minutes, Frederik, to leave your house
Wow.
with everything you value and your family. And, we obviously can't tell you if we can put out the fire and save, your house. What you can do in that moment is you can have optimism and say, okay, what I can control now is my attitude. My attitude to say, like, okay, this is going to be interesting, right? But what we can take is all we value, and this is our family. This is us being together. And we can say we are now going on a road trip that we don't know if we're going to return from. So we go into uncertainty, but with optimism, saying, like, the only thing that we can do is make the best of our times now. And so we went on a short road trip. We parked in our friend's parkways. We slept in our little VW Vanagon. And what we did then is we helped other people. We helped other families. So we went to get donations for those families who already lost their homes, because that's the only thing you can control. You can actually help other families in that situation. While you can't put out the fire that is probably making your house go away. So luckily, after 12 days, we could return. Our house was still there, but many other people lost their homes. And so what we then chose to do is actually helping those families. And I think everybody has in every situation a choice, right? And choose the thing that you actually can control, which is your attitude, your mind state, and what you can do to help others. And so this is really important to understand, that we always have that choice.
What I loved about, as much of the book as I could get was also the stories of Googlers. People always wonder how you have a Google way or innovation approach, or how do people actually set it up, or is there a specific hiring process that makes Google so innovative? And your book is full of these stories of people you've coached and trained on building that future ready mindset. Share some of those folks that you talked to in that process when you're in Dublin or in other parts of Google.
Absolutely. So I was lucky enough to help shape that fabled creative culture at Google for about 12 and a half years. So I had a chance to work with tens of thousands of these Googlers and coach them and train them and really help them to build their own futures while building the future maybe for other people too. And what I found in that time is that there is no specific framework or theory around how to shape your future. There is also not a specific environment you have to be in, right? So there's this notion of, like, you have to be in a creative space to really shape the future that you want to see happening. That's also not true. And you don't have to have access to a lot of resources, right? It's not that you need a lot of money or money at all to create a meaningful, impactful future for yourself. The only thing that you need is to have a specific outlook on the future, where you have a mind state that is cultivated by optimism, by openness, by curiosity, by experimentation, and by empathy. Those 5 dimensions I found in all the people I've worked with and have trained and coached. And everybody had an incredibly optimistic outlook. They were unreserved open. They were curious and asked questions. They experimented and they showed empathy. And when all of those things happened, that's when they were able to really shape a remarkable future for themselves. Like a Newton Cheng that I've been able to work with, an incredible human being who was burned out after actually leading some really big initiatives around physical fitness and mental well-being at Google. He was burned out by the projects that he was leading. What he did is he came back stronger than ever. because he trained himself to be more optimistic, to be open, and to experiment and have deep curiosity. And what he was able to do then, he became one of the world champions of heavy lifts or deadlifts, right? Where he really used his mind state to really become successful in something that he was just curious about. And so it's a remarkable story that really tells you that you don't need to be in a specific environment. You don't need to have money. You don't need any of the other things that we always thought, like a framework or a theory. You basically just need to think about what you can control, and that is your mind state. And in the book, I share about 14 stories that are really truly inspirational by these individuals that really built remarkable futures for themselves and share how they actually did it.
Yeah, no, it's you got great folks. I mean, you have Laura Jones and Adam Leonard and Seth Marbin and John Ratcliffe, and so many amazing people that you have in this book. Everyone should definitely take a look at it. We are so lucky to have you here, Dr. Frederik Pferdt. We are so happy to have you here. Hope we get to catch up in person, but more importantly, you should get a hold of his book. It's on Amazon already today. You can follow him on X at FG Pferdt, Pferdt. And of course, he was Google's first and former Chief Innovation Evangelist and author of this book, What's Next is Now, How to Live Future Ready. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely want to check out his geodem on the back. It's pretty cool. Maybe one day we'll check it out. But with that, we've got another amazing guest. We're super excited to have Jeff Wetzler. And more importantly, we're going to sit here and talk a little bit more about his new book, author of Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You, and of course, for unexpected breakthroughs in leadership and life. And that's called Taking a Chance. Jeff Wetzler has been on a quarter-century quest to transform learning opportunities. He's blending a unique set of leadership experiences from business and education. He's been a management consultant working for some of the top companies, and also a learning facilitator. He's been a CLO at Teach for America, and most recently, the co-CEO of Transcend, a nationally recognized education innovation organization. So Jeff definitely has his credentials. He's got a doctorate in adult learning and leadership from Columbia and a bachelor's in psychology from Brown. And he's also a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network and, of course, an Edmund Hillary Fellow. So he's in New York. And more importantly, you can follow him on Twitter, or what we call X now, Jeffrey Wetzler at JeffreyWetzler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray. It's great to be with you.
So, hey, we're excited to talk about you. This is one of the areas we spend a lot of time on leadership, on coaching, helping people understand where they are. So let's just start with the basics. Why did you write this book? What drove you there?
Yeah, I wrote the book because the problem that it tackles is a very pervasive and painful problem. One that I have experienced firsthand, unfortunately myself, too often, more often than I'd like. And the problem is that the people around us in our lives, whether that be our colleagues, coworkers, clients, bosses, investors, you name it, possess ideas and information and insight, intelligence that if we could find out, we would all be better off. We would make better decisions. We would innovate together better. We would save time. Our relationships would be better. But far too often, the most important things that they are actually thinking, feeling, knowing, they're not telling us. And so we don't find that out. And so I wrote the book because I think it's a problem that we all face. And what's particularly pernicious about the problem is that we often don't even know that we're experiencing it because we don't know that they're not actually saying to us. But I also wrote the book because there's something we can do about the problem. I've had the opportunity over the years to have the chance to work with incredible leaders in the fields of organizational behavior and adult learning who have given me a set of ideas and tools for how to overcome this problem. And a few years ago, I decided it's time to pay it forward. I actually want to share with other people what we can do to overcome this problem so that we can really tap into the intelligence all around us.
Is this a generational problem? Because when I talk to people in their 70s and 80s, they just tell it like it is, right? They don't hold back. They're not worried about my feelings. I mean, they feel like that need to get it out of their system and say, you suck. I mean, okay, fine. Why do I suck, right? I mean, what is happening here? Is it because people are holding back, or they just feel polite? I mean, it really feels like a societal problem. So tell me, what stays unspoken and why do people withhold?
Yeah. So big picture, what stays unspoken is far too much. It's often what we most need to know. In the research for the book, I identified 4 big categories of information that too often stays unspoken. The first is the struggles that other people are dealing with. So,
Yes.
if you've got a colleague or even a customer or a friend, often they're going through more than you realize. And for all kinds of reasons, which we can get into, you're not going to hear and find out that they're struggling, what they're struggling with, the extent of their struggles. Even if you could help, even if you would want to help, quite often we don't find that out. So that's number one. A second thing that people often don't tell us is what they really think about an issue, especially if their view is unpopular, especially if they think that you disagree with their view. You're not going to hear it. Or if you do hear some whiff of it, you're often not going to hear where it comes from, why they believe what they actually believe. So that's the second thing. Third thing that they often are not going to tell you is their own observations or feedback about you. Everybody around you sees things that you're doing well, that you could do better. Quite often, we don't get that feedback about how other people could contribute to our leveling up and being better. And then the last thing, which I think speaks to maybe the topic that we just heard from Frederik on, is people often don't share with us their wild and crazy ideas. The innovations that they have that might be totally game changer, but that they think might get dismissed, or they think this might be too crazy. And often I think the answers to where we need to go as people, as communities, as teams, and organizations, those answers live in the room. They live in the organization, but the ideas just don't get out there. So those are the four biggest kind of categories of information that we often stay unaware of, despite the fact that it's right underneath our nose.
Well, this leads to the question of curiosity. How come
Yes.
we don't ask the questions, right? I was blaming everyone else earlier, like, yeah, how
Right.
come they don't tell me? But on the other hand, like, why don't we ask? And I think you're touching on that. There's a little of a fear factor there. Is there any way we can actually improve our curiosity and ask more questions?
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, I want to say the lack of us asking the question is one of the reasons why people don't tell us. Oftentimes, people they don't know if we care. They don't know if we're interested. And so, if we don't ask them the question, they're gonna think, well, I guess they don't want to know. I'll just keep it to myself.
Create that opening for them is what you're saying.
Exactly. But then your question becomes, well, how come we don't ask? If it's that easy, why don't we just ask the question? And it turns out that there's multiple reasons why we don't ask. One of the reasons we don't ask is we don't even realize there's something to ask about. So often we walk around in the world thinking thinking we get what's going on, thinking we know reality, thinking we realize we realize this person is this way and we know why they're acting this way. And so our lack of curiosity is one of the biggest barriers that stops us from asking. And we can come back to the question of how do we get more curious? And I loved that curiosity was one of Frederik's elements as well in terms of future readiness. But that's one of the reasons. A second reason is sometimes we think that if we ask the question, it will not be well received, that the other person will think this is prying or this is too sensitive. And so we hold ourselves back. And there's fascinating research that talks about how people hold themselves back from asking questions that they think would be too sensitive to ask, that other people wish that they would just be asked that question as well. So we make the wrong assumptions. And then a third reason we don't ask is that asking is a skill. It's not necessarily, something that we are all born with knowing. What are all the questions that we could ask? What's the taxonomy of different kinds of things that you could ask someone? It turns out there's a whole set of different kinds of questions, but no one's we don't teach that in schools. In fact, in schools, we often stamp out kids' curiosity and we tell them to sit down and shut up and give us the right answer. We don't encourage that natural questioning. And so people haven't necessarily developed the skills. So I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why we don't ask.
This has got to be the most popular class at like at HBS now.
I think it's one of the most important skill sets that people can be developing.
I mean, you got Amy Edmondson endorsing this thing, and she's
right.
like, "Let's ask more questions."
Yeah,
So-
and Amy makes a really important point in her long, I think, and pivotal research contribution, which is that just asking the question is not enough to get a true answer from someone else. They have to feel safe to tell you their truth.
All right, this wouldn't be a real program if we didn't have a 5-step program. So what are 5 steps we have to do to get to the ask?
Yeah. So the book centers something that I call the ask approach, which are 5 steps, as you say, that when put together, give us the greatest chance of truly tapping into the insights, the ideas, the wisdom of other people. I'll just run through them really quickly. The first one, it comes back to curiosity. So if we're not genuinely curious, it doesn't matter what we do next. People will see through it. But when we are genuinely curious, people want to share more with us. And so I call it choose curiosity. And when we choose curiosity, we center in our minds one single question, which is the question of what can I learn from this person? So if I'm sitting down with you or anyone and I say to myself, what can I learn from this person? That starts to put me into a curious mindset, and other questions start to come, like, what do they see that I don't see? What do they know? What's their life experience been? How do they experience me? All those kinds of things. So number one, choose curiosity.
Right.
Once we're curious, number two builds off of Amy Edmondson's work, which is called Make It Safe. So it's reducing the barrier so that it's easier, it's more comfortable, it's more appealing for people to tell us their truth, especially if it's a hard truth.
So Jeff, I can't ask you the question, then tell you, why'd you say that?
That's right. That's right. But if you ask me the question and then you say, let me just explain to you why I'm asking the question. If you start to open up first, that makes it easier for me to open up as well. That's part of what goes into making it safe. Number three is the heart of the ask approach, which is called pose quality questions. And I define a quality question very simply as a question that helps us learn something important from someone else. And so much of what we think are questions are not quality questions. I call them crummy questions.
What's a crummy question? That's a very good point. What's a crummy question?
So one kind of crummy question is just a question that, when someone will say, here's what I think, and then they say, isn't that right? And they just add that, isn't that right at the end?
That's a crummy question.
That's a crummy question.
And
then sometimes that I think that that's well-intentioned and people want to know, do you really agree with them? But by saying, isn't that right? It makes it very hard for someone to agree. There's all kinds of other crummy questions, like when a lawyer is leading a witness down a path and trying to get them to admit that they're guilty. And so a lot of what we do actually is not a high quality question. On the contrary, just an example of a high quality question. One of the strategies is called request reactions. And it's doing that is simply to say, hey, here's what I think, or here's some feedback, or here's what I'd like for us to do. What's your reaction to that? Just pausing and asking, what's your thinking about my thinking? And we assume that people are just going to tell us that. And maybe to your point, if we're talking to some old crotchety person, maybe they are going to tell us that. But quite often people are not going to tell us their actual reactions to what we have to say. And so if we just pause and ask something like, what's your reaction? What does that make you think? How does that strike you? How does that land with you? Any of those, what might I be missing? Any of those kinds of questions radically increases the chances that we're going to tap into the intelligence of the other person by hearing their thinking on our thinking. So that's number three, pose quality questions. Number four is called listen to learn. And listen to learn is very different than listening to look smart or listening to prove that we're right or listening to get this over with. Listening to learn is really all about trying to understand what's the most essential thing that someone is saying and also what they're not saying. It's about listening not just to the content of what they have to say, but to the emotions that they're expressing and displaying and the actions that they're taking. And so in the book, I talk about different ways that we can listen to learn. And then the final. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I was gonna say, what do we do once we do that? Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So brings us to the final step of the ask approach, which is my favorite step because I am a junkie for learning. And this final step is called reflect and reconnect. And this is really about how do we process what we hear? How do we actually take in all the things that people are saying to us, sift through what's most important, and then turn it over in our minds so that we can convert this information into insight and this insight into action.
All right, Jeff, I'm going to ask, what does it take to become a world-class asker?
Anyone can do it. In many ways, I think it's about reclaiming the natural curiosity that we all had as kids. But it's a skill like anything else, just like playing the tuba or learning to play golf or whatever it is. It takes awareness of what you need to do. It takes practice and a little bit of willingness to try it out.
But I'm leading the witness here, but aren't we beating the crap out of kids in school from doing that? Like everybody wants the kids to be quiet and fall into line, right? Boys are getting crushed from asking questions and experimental learning isn't there, right? Other people feel like unable to ask like tough questions in class. We're not even getting debate. People are afraid to debate ideas anymore. Like it feels oppressive.
It is oppressive. This is actually in the organization that I co-founded called Transcend. We are literally redesigning schools through innovation and through design thinking so that we can nurture the kind of curiosity that kids have and stop doing all the things that you just described.
Is it working? Can we get that going? Is it more like a charter school, private school thing versus a public school? Is it like any
public schools, district
higher
schools,
education?
Yeah. In every state of this country, there are schools that are redesigning what learning experiences look like, that are putting kids back in charge of their learning, that are reigniting kids' passions. And so we can do that in any kind of environment.
Well, this is really important, right? You end this book by talking about how we can actually live the questions and
Yes.
repair the world.
Yes.
And I thought that was probably the most important part of this book,
Thank
because
you.
once you got there, we knew what to do, but
Yes.
there's a bigger mission and a bigger purpose that you
That's
jumped
exactly right. We're living in a time of polarization. I mean, we see it left and right, whether that's on campuses, whether that's
into. Ooh,
religious,
literally,
whether
yes.
that, literally all of it. And I end by talking about how if we could bring this ask approach to any situation where we're interacting with someone who seems like the other, and replace our natural reactions with something like, what can I learn from this person? That doesn't mean that they're going to convert us to their way of thinking. That doesn't mean we have to fly their flag or anything like that. But if we just treat every person as if there's something that we can learn from them, I guarantee that we will see their humanity. I guarantee it will bring us a little bit closer together. And it's also more likely that they're going to want to learn from us as well.
It's a great question. Like, I feel like there are powers that be that don't want us to do the ask, right? They're happy with the status quo, and no matter what side you're on, everybody will just say, "Ah, that's just the other side." Um, is there something leaders can do to actually create that environment, at least on the national stage, given how, I don't know, catty we are these days?
Leaders play an outsized role in shaping the culture, whether that's the culture of their team, their organization, their community, the country. The greatest thing that leaders can do is to role model. And in the book, I talk about the idea of leaders being the learner in chief. The more that a leader can be asking questions, the more that a leader can be saying, here's a time when I changed my mind. The more that a leader can be saying, what would you do in this situation? Here's my dilemma. What's your input? Any of those kinds of things send the message to the people who are around the leaders that learning, being curious, asking questions is a good thing. And it's amazing the power of modeling that leaders can do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That modeling is super important. And how do we actually get organizations to build that into their culture? Definitely something useful for all leaders to look at. Um, Last question. What's next? What are you going to do next? You've got this out there. Are you going to build an institute? Is there a classroom? Is there a training session, modules? Like, where do you see this going?
Yeah, Frederik talked about being in an experimental mindset. And so I've had the book out for the last few months. I'm learning from how the world reacts to it. One of the things that a number of people are saying to me is, makes a ton of sense. We need this, but books alone don't build capability. We need experiences to build capability. And so I'm experimenting with different kinds of experiences with teams and organizations, and also in schools and communities, that can take the ideas of the book and turn them not just into things that we talk about, but actual real muscles that people can have that are woven into the DNA of organizations, teams, universities, and schools.
Well, we're here with Jeff Wetzler. Tap into the hidden wisdom of people around you for unexpected breakthroughs in leadership and life. Book came out May 7th. It's an editor's pick on Amazon. Definitely get it there. And of course, thank you so much for being on the show, and hope to see you in New York.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. All right. Well, as you can tell, another action-packed episode, 3 amazing guests. And of course, you should have captured a whole bunch of things. We learned from Anand, really, that this intersection between healthcare, AI, and where personal health and the continuum of care are headed. It's definitely a very interesting space, and actually more and more data-driven over time, but more and more importantly, more ambient. And one of the topics that we've been talking about ambient experiences. These are ones that happen in the background that are designed to be mindful and to help you figure out what's happening next. We spent some time with Frederik Pferdt, really getting the right mindset, this future-ready mindset. The future isn't scary. It's actually in your control. And when you have agency, you look at the world very differently, and you can help others actually expand their minds. Definitely very important inside organizations as you think about innovation and building innovation culture. And of course, we rounded up with Jeff Wetzler, talking about how to asking the right set of questions so that you're able to actually build feedback loops, reflect, and more importantly, improve yourself along the way. And of course, definitely a very, very exciting episode here at DisrupTV. So more importantly, we've got next week, episode number 373. We've got Bonnie Hayden Chang, author of The Return on Kindness. We've got Stefan Freifferbacher, author of How to Create Innovation, the ultimate guide to proven strategies and business models to drive innovation and digital transformation. And Andrew Chow, author of Cryptomania, Hype, Hope, and the Fall of FTX's billion-dollar fintech empire. You get a front row seat to that. So more importantly, that's episode 374. We'll catch you next week. And of course, if it's Friday, it's DisrupTV, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You'll catch Vala, Ashar, and I next week. So thanks a lot for being on the show, and see you everybody, see you guys out there on Twitter, X, and all the other different social channels. Take care.